George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
It's a cluster flux. Flux, I tell you. The war is going so well for NATO, they've decided to supply cluster bombs to the Ukrainian armed forces, even though 120 countries have banned it, including most of the NATO countries, who are about to be inveigled into a collective breach of their own national law by supplying the cluster bombs. Princess Diana died in vain after all her campaigning against this most pernicious of weapons, still blowing the feet and arms of Cambodian and Laotian children 50 years after the Americans dropped millions of them in an undeclared, secret, dirty war. And speaking of dirty war, what an article I've just read about the Kinkora Boys' Home and the role that the British intelligence services played in what was effectively a honey trap of young boys who were inveigling politicians and other paramilitary leaders into sexual abuse, even rape, even murder of the children involved in that home. And right at the top, the apex, appears to be Lord Louis Mountbatten, the former High Hedian in the British royal family. Speaking of that sort of thing, we'll have to show you a shadow because inexplicably we cannot name, though we know the name, of the British Broadcasting Corporation, man accused of similarly disgusting offences against a person who was legally still a child at the time he was exploiting them. We'll be talking war and exploitation throughout this show with two super guests. Keep your seatbelts securely fastened, I promise you. This is going to be a bumpy night.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
I don't know if there's an injunction stopping me telling you who is the BBC presenter, highly paid and central to the BBC's output, according to the scuttlebutt in the newspapers that are dancing around that issue this evening. How would I know if there was an injunction? All I know is that my editor is presently convulsed, having kittens at the possibility I will say who it is. But if what I think is true, it is the gravest crisis yet for the BBC in this kind of thing. Not only because the person involved is, as the newspapers say, central to the BBC's output, but also because of the complete cod that they are making, again, at dealing with sexual allegations against an important BBC figure. You'd think Sir, that's what he was called, Jimmy Savile, had never happened. You'd think they hadn't been down this road 1, 2, 5, 10 times before. Rolf Harris, Jimmy Savile, all kinds of them. I better not misname anybody. So I'll stop at those two, the two biggest cases in the last decade. But they're making all the same mistakes again. And it seems to be a curse on so-called national broadcasters. In fact, merely mouthpieces of the state that pays for them, directly or indirectly. There was already an enormous head of steam behind the campaign to abolish the license fee in Britain. Now I predict this will become unstoppable. So let me add my voice. Defund the BBC and RTE and all the other state mouthpieces around the world. No one should be forced to watch any particular television or pay for it, whether they watch it or not. Even Stalin didn't think of that one, sending pensioners to prison for refusing or being unable to pay the ever more exorbitant license fee. Now that I've got that off my chest, let me turn to far weightier matters. A cluster flux. That's the only way you can describe a situation whereby the United States of America, who said from the podium in the White House 12 months ago, through the mouth of Jen Psaki, the then spokesperson of President Joe Biden, that cluster bombs constituted a war crime, to 12 months later justifying the supply of exactly those weapons to Ukraine from the United States. The commander-in-chief, in his dotage, possibly unguardedly, was very honest about why. Because they're running out of ammunition, he said. Which means, of course, that his friends, Zelensky's friends in the armories of Europe and North America, must also be running out of ammunition. And yet, not a village has been taken in the so-called spring then summer counter-offensive. So now that you've told the Russians that you've all run out of ammunition, well, you'll be lucky if they stop at Kiev, because there must be a temptation to quiet these yapping dogs in the Baltic states. There might even be a temptation to settle scores with the Polish bigger yapping dog. But I don't think that that will happen. I don't think Russia intends even to go to Kiev. But there is no doubt that Ukraine and NATO have lost the war, not just on the battlefield, but in the production plants, in the military-industrial complex. It turns out that notwithstanding an eye-watering amount of money spent on defense budgets, none of the NATO countries are able to fight a war. The British armed forces, led by donkeys who are never done threatening other people's countries, don't have enough munitions to survive a single day, said the recently retired head of the British military. We would run out in hours, he said. Mind you, we've got the Challenger tank, which we've sent to Ukraine, but hold on, Ukraine in the last hour has just denounced the British restrictions on the use of those Challenger tanks, not to send them to risky areas. Hello? Risky areas in a war with a nuclear superpower called Russia. You only want your Challenger tanks to go to areas that are not risky. Where are those? Where are the non-risky areas, little Ben Wallace, that you are prepared to allow the Ukrainians to use your Challenger tank? Speaking of little Ben, you'll remember I have history with him. I did myself up in a dicky bow. I endured the suet pudding of a dinner at the Oxford Union. My good wife in a ball gown, everyone looking their best, all to get my hands on, metaphorically speaking, little Ben Wallace, who didn't show up for the debate. He had a shiver run up his spine somewhere in Whitehall and failed to make the train. But the man he sent in his stead, the well-named Toby Elwood, he tried to make the best fist he could of his warmongering performances in and outside of the House of Commons. He demurred when I accused him of having called for Britain to implement martial law, even though I had seen him on Sky News, his lips moving, actually say it. Because, of course, under martial law, we wouldn't be having a debate, and I wouldn't be broadcasting to you this evening. All civil and democratic rights would be in the bin if we had Toby Elwood in charge of our defences. But Ben is a bitter man. Bitter because he had set his cocked hat at the NATO top job when the Norwegian tailor's dummy, I never remember, is he a tailor's dummy or a hairdresser? Either way, if the hat fits, wear it. Jens Stoltenberg is due to retire. Little Ben threw his cocked hat in the ring, but Joe Biden put the black spot on little Ben. After all that bowing and scraping, after all that kowtowing, after all that kissing, risky, of the US presidential ring, Joe Biden vetoed Ben Wallace as head of NATO. Adding insult to injury, his pick is Ursula von der Leyen. Because of her vast military experience, of course. Because she knows a thing or two about war. Because her sons are fighting at the front, maybe. Oh no, when asked if her own children were in the military, she said, and I quote, ha, ha, ha. No, it's other mothers' sons that they intend to send into the front line. If we get there, I say front line. There will be no meaningful front line, of course, if the nuclear missiles start flying. As I predict, ineluctably, they would and would have to. So we continue to stand on the precipice of the most perilous of time, but we've got Ursula von der Leyen as Commander-in-Chief to rely on. Or Joe Biden, seen on a beach today, a fine figure of a man for 99, literally shuffling around in the sand like a lost and demented senior, with no one apparently even looking after him. But he made the plane, and he is on his way now to Europe to justify a decision on cluster bombs which will force most of the NATO countries to break their own law, their own treaty that they signed with such fanfare, not to have anything further to do with these horrific munitions. You saw the picture I put up on the screen there. A picture of a big bomb with hundreds of little bombs, at least 12% of which in Kosovo failed to explode. That is until a child picks them up, years, even decades after the war has gone. Now, I haven't seen these munitions in Kosovo, though I know that 25 years after that war, only a tiny percentage of the huge numbers of cluster bombs that were dropped on Serbia to force it into submission, a submission which has never come and will never come, and Kosovo will never be recognized, neither by Serbia nor by her friends, or even by the many European countries with plenty to lose from the right of regions unilaterally to secede from their territory. But I have been in Cambodia. As a matter of fact, I spent 3 whole weeks in Cambodia as the head of the British contingent of the election monitoring group, monitoring the prime ministerial, general, presidential elections, all in one, in the 1990s. I have fond memories of Cambodia, but not so much of the number of limbless and deformed children that I came across as a result of the carpet bombing with these cluster bombs in the war 50 years and more ago. I mean, like on every street. I mean, like on every corner. I mean, a child unable to hold its begging bowl out on every corner in Cambodia as a result of this bombardment. And Laos was even more severely affected by the use of this munition. I dwell on it not just because of my personal experience, although that is profound in my case. I dwell on it not even to show the hypocrisy of Joe Biden. I dwell on it to show the level of servility of the European allies of Joe Biden in NATO. You see, if somebody was forcing you to humiliate yourself in front of your own public, to whom you had campaigned for a ban on cluster munitions, and someone came along and said, that alliance we're in is going to supply them to the regime in Kiev. You'd think that someone, somewhere, particularly in Britain, where the people's princess, Diana, led the campaign to outlaw these weapons, you'd think that somebody would muster the courage to say, not in my name. All they needed to say was, I'm in for the war in Ukraine. Matter of fact, I'm even more gung-ho than you, President Biden, though I don't have the wherewithal to actually do anything about it. But up with this I cannot put, because it makes me look like a moral dwarf in front of my public, in front of my monarch. Charles, it was his wife, as was, who led the campaign. But no, all that Rishi Sunak would say is that Britain discourages the use of cluster bombs in Ukraine. The Italian government's been more forthright. The French government has thus far been silent. Maybe because the French government is sailing into all kinds of trouble with NATO, which may or may not be related to recent events. But the French have told NATO that they will not support the opening of a NATO office in Japan on the basis that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization cannot conceivably be defined as having an institutional interest in Tokyo. And they add for good measure, the Japanese are not that mad keen about Joe Biden doing so in any case. France is drawing a line in Asia. Maybe the others in NATO will take heed, because I warn them this: losing a war against Russia in Ukraine is one thing. You losing a war against China in the Straits of Taiwan, in the South China Sea, will sink your empire forever. Get off the warpath, ladies and gentlemen. You really are not fit for it. Fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
It's heating up on the Zuckerberg-Musk conflict. I've just seen a tweet from Elon Musk which simply says Zuck is a cuck, which seems to be some kind of insult. I'll have to consult other authorities on that. The proximate reason, though there have been many, is that Zuckerberg appears to have, how shall I put this kindly, been inspired by Elon Musk's Twitter and has produced his own site, which looks remarkably like Elon Musk's Twitter. And moreover, that he has been helped to do so by a number of people in possession of the intellectual property of Elon Musk and Twitter. So you may think it unimportant. My editor thought it worth running as a poll, and here it is. Elon's got the gig, I think. Which one? Musk's Twitter or Zuckerberg's Threads? I'm on both. I've got no candle to hold for Elon Musk. I'm suing him in the Dublin courts, and I'm picking up thousands of followers on Threads, and I haven't even pronounced yet on there. But overwhelmingly, it seems you think that Musk's Twitter will prevail. So will Zuckerberg's Threads go the way of MySpace? Anyone remember MySpace? So you can vote on my Telegram, on my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. And 10,000 of you have done already, and I've only just announced it. Here are the numbers. If you want to comment on anything said or not said on the show that should have been, but remember, we cannot name the BBC presenter. In the UK and Ireland, entirely free of charge, it's 08081965522. In the US and Canada, toll free, it's +1 844 944 3344. And in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Mike Jones is an Englishman abroad in Moscow, as it happens, where he is producing some of the finest work from behind the Iron Curtain imposed by us. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, not a single word has been heard in Western television, radio, and newspapers about how it all looks from the other side. I was brought up to believe that one ought to try and walk a mile in the other fellow's shoes so we could see what makes him tick or limp. But that's not, of course, the policy we have followed. So no one gets interviewed behind that Iron Curtain we have imposed. No one attempts to explain how the conflict looks from Russia, let alone how it looks from the Russian street, where Mike Jones, former British military officer, has become a blogger, a vlogger, a commentator extraordinaire. I've just been looking at some of his videos of Moscow just in the last few hours, and they are absolutely beautiful and a must for anyone who wants to know anything beyond the cartoon level of what we are up against. And I'm glad to say he's now a regular contributor to the mother of all talk shows. Mike, welcome back. to the show. Let me start with the less important, but nonetheless striking. These are beautiful little videos you're producing of Moscow. Tell the viewers what it's like living in Moscow.
It's a wonderful city. I was walking with my wife just the other day, and one of the key things that sticks out is how family friendly the whole city is. In residential areas, you often have children's playgrounds and always very clean, well maintained. The people here are wonderful. It's very easy actually to be an Englishman abroad, as you put it, because they're very kind, welcoming, and often very excited to exercise their English language skills. So it is a wonderful place to be. And thank you, Mr. Galloway, for the very kind words.
It is, I think today, it may have been yesterday, but it's this weekend, the Day of Fidelity and Family in Russia. It's one of many contrasts between Western society towards the fin de siècle of globalized capitalism, that the Russians are becoming more faithful and family-oriented at exactly the time these ideas have become, well, jokes, if not swear words, in Western countries. That may strengthen one and weaken the other. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I've recently been to Grozny in Chechnya, where, like most of Russia, but particularly in the Chechen region, there is such a celebration of heritage, culture, tradition, and most of that is centered around the family and all these things that certainly I was raised with to value and treasure, and things that, as you rightly say, have almost become taboo in the West. So it's always refreshing to see people celebrate these very important, time-tested and honored practices and traditions. And as you point out, one society appears to be flourishing, whilst the other one appears to be decaying and crumbling before our eyes.
I wonder if these things are in any way connected. Now, moving on, Mike, the war, I mean, to say this, but I do. The war is going very badly now for NATO. None of their state mouthpieces have said so in as many words yet, but the only meaning you can infer from the cluster bomb, cluster flux, is that Ukraine is running out of ammunition. That means its friends are running out of ammunition, whilst its servicemen are still being literally snatched off the street. I saw a shocking video today of a young man dragged out of his car in Lviv, I think, though it may have been in Odessa, dragged out of his car and dragged off to the front, in front of his family. The counter-offensive has come up against a ring of steel which it is simply unable to penetrate, particularly if it's run out of ammunition. Is that known widely amongst the Russian public?
I believe so, yes. There's this faith in the leadership and the patience, whilst, as we've discussed before, everyone wants this to end as soon as possible, which is completely understandable. No one likes to see this satanic bloodletting that appears to be happening in Ukraine. But Russia appears to be achieving the goal that President Putin set out of demilitarizing Ukraine. But whether it was intended or not, as a knock-on effect, as Biden himself admitted, appears to be demilitarizing NATO, the Western collective countries in general, with all these vehicles being sent to this scrap heap now in Ukraine. So much so that, again, as you point out, Ben Wallace then supplying Challenger 2s for God knows what reason. The Leopards burning in the fields, as Russia promised it would do, have been catastrophic for business and those industries and those countries, an absolute embarrassment for them. And again, I can corroborate those testimonies that Ukrainians often refuse to go into battle in the Leopards because they know that they are a target, and there's even a bounty on these Western machineries that will be paid by funds set up by Russian oligarchs to paid to the servicemen that successfully destroy these. So it's a almost farcical situation at this point, and it would be funny if it wasn't so darn tragic.
Well, speaking of our own military, I mentioned in my monologue the ludicrous demand that the British have made that their Challenger tanks they've given to the Ukrainians must not be sent to risky areas. I mean, I'm not sure that there is a single place in all of Ukraine that is not a risky area in the middle of a war. You know very well we have 2 aircraft carriers, one of them held together by chewing gum, the other one out of action altogether. Our entire military, Army, Navy and Air Force would fit comfortably actually into Villa Park in Birmingham and still have room for a few elephants wandering around backstage. How come our armed forces, actual prowess, is in such stark contrast to the warlike languages and threats made by the donkeys that lead them?
Tobias Ellwood needs to be prevented from any television appearances, in my opinion. It is bafflingly bizarre, some of the things he comes out with, talking about direct confrontation with Russia. And this is the same military that even when I was a part of it probably 20 years ago now was being very slowly degraded with cuts upon cuts upon cuts. And despite a proud history and competence of its service members, the idea that it could go toe-to-toe with a superpower like Russia is just unimaginable. And I think sometimes even Ben Wallace has slightly understood this and said it. But Tobias Ellwood seems to be living in this alternate reality, and he's not the only one. Beerbach as well, in her own little fantasy land half the time. And even, as you've said, Ursula von der Leyen is another one. These people at the top in these worrying positions of power seem so greatly disconnected from not just reality when it comes to the conflict, but even their own countries and economies. The West called for regime change in Russia, and nearly every country that sounded that same call has seemed to have political issues. Most notably recently, Macron in France, fiddling whilst Paris burns.
Or Rutte in the Netherlands, who has finally fallen. Let's hope the Dutch farmers have a famous victory in yet another general election forthcoming there. It's like a curse. All these politicians that said Assad must go have all themselves now gone. And the politicians that said Putin must go are going down like 9 pins. And some fools say there is no God, Mike.
Yeah, it does. It does seem to be this strange, often quipped as the Zelensky curse for some of these politicians. But I understand, really, if these people are living in these dream fantasy lands and their economies that are pretty much being sabotaged, if not destroyed, with these ridiculous sanctions that they keep reaching for and recycling and trying to assure everyone eventually it's going to work, when quite clearly the evidence suggests it's the opposite effect, destroying their own economies. Germany being deindustrialized now, capital flight out of Germany, something that hasn't been seen in years, and it probably would never have been thought of before. These are really notable times we're living in, which is why I feel most motivated to do as much as I can to cover and document it. Unfortunately, YouTube disagrees with me and deleted my entire channel off the platform.
Well, we'll have to find you elsewhere. We'll ask again at the end of this interview how best people can follow you. But, you can always count on capitalism to show you the straws in the wind. And I saw one of them on the supermarket shelves in Moscow just the other day. Pringles. Pringles are back in Russia. They're not called Pringles, but they are Pringles. And a lot of these businesses that cut and ran, many of them good riddance, McDonald's and Coca-Cola and all the rest, Many of them are now creeping back. As the Russian economy booms, while the Western economies flop. You getting much sense of that yourself?
Absolutely. That's another comic aspect. So Starbucks, for instance, you'll walk down the street and it's now called Stars Coffee. Same color of the logo and emblem. Obviously, that's intentional to keep that brand recognition. But Starbucks can safely say, oh, we don't do business in Russia as Starbucks. Sure, but those brands are still present. And that's just one example out of a whole raft of them. And again, for me, it gives me this wry smile of, again, another example of hypocrisy from the West. Oh, we'll say this, and yet they do another. And as you pointed out, capitalism, that greed, that profit, they just cannot deny the market share that Russia represented and that they walked away from. Leroy Merlin is actually a French company. They refused to leave Russia simply because of that fact. A huge part of their market share in this home improvement sector, they're a DIY store, was represented in Russia, and they knew it would be catastrophic for their business if they were to engage in these sort of moral politics that caught everyone and everyone got so enthusiastic about. But they've stayed, and other companies, a German rival to them, left. And of course, Leroy Merlin have then profited and filled that gap. If not these foreign companies, which there is a less case, the most common case, like you said, with Coca-Cola, now there's Dobry Cola. Very same coloring, very similar lettering, but now a Russian company that's coming to fill that void of that demand. Hence why the Russian economy is booming, and certainly domestically speaking, and the other Western economies are seemingly collapsing.
Well, Finland, having made such a song and dance about stopping Russian gas, has now restarted it. Almost everyone in Europe is buying Russian gas more expensively than it would have been if they'd bought it from Russia. They're buying it from India, which bought it from Russia, and so on. As you said earlier, if it wasn't so serious, it's enough to make you laugh, really.
Yeah, I believe Russia was the primary supplier of gas to Spain as well for the month of June. It was reported, I think, in Russian media. Again, that's where there's this agenda that they're pushing, which, again, disconnected from reality and reason. Yet you can't argue with just the facts that energy is required. And before people enjoyed this cheap gas, Russia was a reliable supplier of this energy that fed the engine of Europe in Germany. And without that, and by conjuring this fake narrative and having to have the ramifications forced upon peoples who I don't believe, and they tell me themselves, would never have supported these actions against Russia, all in support of this proxy state created primarily by Victoria Nuland and funded by the US, with Biden and Hunter's involvement as well there, for this confrontation, seemingly born out of just hatred or personal egregions against either the leader or the country itself. It's really, again, as you say, it would be funny if it wasn't so serious. And again, the populations now in the West that are suffering make this all the more tragic.
Mike, where can people now best see your material?
Primarily Telegram, t.me/iEarlGrey TV. I have toyed around with other new channels on YouTube. Otherwise, my channel's still active on Rumble. And that's where it's rumble.tv, I think, /iEarlGrey TV. But primarily Telegram.
I hope we've, iEarlGrey, iEarlGrey.tv?
No, all one word, iEarlGrey TV.
Okay, brilliant. I hope everyone tunes in, because you are a very valuable voice from somewhere that we're not really hearing from at all. Mike Jones, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Who are you with, Musk or Zuckerberg? Who do you think is going to win this big battle? I'd call it a war, but it kind of devalues the word war. Coming up after the break, it's your calls on all of this. Stay tuned. Let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of Moats on our Moats podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. Just search Moats with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go to Glasgow. Sarkar on the cluster bombs issue. Welcome back, Sarkar.
Hi, George. Thank you so much for once again, getting me the opportunity to speak to you and ask questions which normally media people never discuss. They always put a different spin to it. George, the reason I'm calling is it's a very serious issue because Germany, UK, and many of the NATO allies are again supplying cluster bombs to Ukraine in this conflict. Cluster bombs have never benefited anyone's cause. It causes more mayhem than stopping any war. These cluster bombs are the same type of bombs which the West had accused Assad and every other, Middle Eastern government which they have overthrown, saying that these are the kind of bombs they have, and they have bombed their own people. And look at the hypocrisy. Now America wants to supply the same kind of bombs in this war. Will Russia sit back? I was hearing a previous guy you were speaking to. He so rightly said we were getting a much more cheaper gas and oil. In their efforts to defeat Russia, Britain have changed 3 prime ministers. The Western government, so many governments in Europe have lost their governments, but their obsession with hating Russia seems to be never-ending. Cluster bombs. Is this what we have come to, George? What will be the ramifications of this?
Alas, it is brilliant, Sarkar, as always. This is what we have come to. Nathan is in Seattle on the battle of Musk and Zuck. Go ahead, Nathan. What would you like to say?
Well, thank you for having me on again. But, I just wanted to express some of my frustration that we're having a discussion about MySpace versus, Facebook versus Twitter. Both sites continue to censor, even though Elon Musk guaranteed he wouldn't. Both people continue to take money from the Department of Defense. And you compared MySpace, or the new spinoff Threads, to MySpace. And I was personally offended because MySpace was a much better website, ahead of its time. I was around. It was like leagues better than anything Facebook could come up with. Then someone like Mark Zuckerberg started working with the government, created like inferior version of MySpace, and all of a sudden that's everywhere. You can't get rid of it. It comes on your phone. You can't erase the accounts if you wanted to, and it's all because this is by design. Like, these people are making billions of dollars off of working with the government, whether we want to give them our business or not. And I would love to just see all the criminals behind the censoring, platforms that I can't escape paying, brought to justice. And
you don't have to have Twitter or Facebook. And I apologize to any who are still in mourning over MySpace. I was just glad that Rupert Murdoch lost a shed load of money when he bought it, just as it was going out of business. Nobody forcing you, Nathan, to be on Twitter or on Facebook, are there?
No, we're not being forced to use it, but we're being forced to pay for it. It's like an extortion racket. They get billions of dollars. They get billions of dollars in contracts with Pentagon, CIA. Then they take the billions of dollars that they take from us. They hide it usually in European countries like Ireland. That's where Facebook is based out of. So it's like basically an extortion racket. And then like they hold on to your data for years. You can try to get rid of your MySpace or Facebook account. They make it pretty much impossible. I've known several people try to get off. They can't get their data off of there. I think Europe, you guys have the right to be forgotten. Some law passed, but we don't have that protection out here. So, I mean, yeah.
There's a lot have been forgotten. Okay, Nathan, thanks. I think you've made your point, and I'm grateful to you for making it. It's Musk, 95%, 91%, 93%, and 93%. Looks like Zuck is a cuck, a weakling, a sapling, unable to stand up to the mighty Elon Musk. If you think different, you better get voting. Your man is being humiliated here. YouTube comments, Morns Lad says the choreography of the minor NATO powers, like the UK and Germany, faking outrage at the US supplying cluster bombs is sick because they won't do anything to stop it. Outrage, Morns Lad? I saw no outrage. All I saw was little Rishi Rashid Sunak, go figure, say that Britain discouraged the use, like it discourages people from, I don't know, smoking plain cigarettes. On line one is Lance in Canada, always worth hearing. Go ahead, Lance.
Yeah, I guess there's two issues here that I cannot believe that our media can actually be co-opted to stay away from. It seems that, with watching, the suppression of the information about J.P. Morgan subpoena and seeing this movie kind of being suppressed, this Sound of Freedom movie about child trafficking, it does amaze me that our media can sort of stay silent on traffic freedom. I mean, or on nuclear let's say nuclear dangers and child trafficking. To me, those are two issues that no matter how much you paid me or what I was doing in the world, I could not be paid to stay quiet on. And even recently, Zelensky called for a Russian false flag against Zaporizhia. Things are getting risky there. Like the reservoir is gone, so they are still trying to keep water cooling that plant, and there's still a very grave danger of a nuclear release. And right now in Korea, trade unions are protesting the release of radioactive water from Fukushima into the ocean. So if we just look at history, a little bit of history, we see that cost of ignoring this danger, I don't care how much you're paid or how much you love your entourage or how great your ratings are as a reporter, ignoring things like that seem morally reprehensible to me and crazy for your own health and your own sake.
Morally reprehensible, but when you're a prostitute, you don't have any morals, and that's the kind of people we are talking about. On line two is Simon in London. On wokeism, I'm always up for a bit of a rumble on wokeism. Simon, what would you like to say?
Well, you say a rumble, but I wish I could declare war on wokeism because it's literally destroying the entire UK, I think. Indeed, the entire world, perhaps. But it's guys like us, we stand up to it and we can fight it. So hopefully we'll win that war. But the thing that annoys me the most, right, from the danger of the current woke culture that we're seeing at the moment manifesting itself it's manifesting itself as something that's supporting anti-racism and and against Islamophobia. You know, it's against it's for Islam. You know, almost. It's almost one could almost see it as taking ownership of Islam, you know, which is nonsense. Because remember, these same woke individuals, and correct me if I'm wrong here, George, weren't these the same woke individuals who you once one individual came on your radio show in your old channel years ago, getting excited about a piece of woman's clothing? He wanted to ban the burqa, if you remember, you know. And there's the same.
I remember it. Yeah.
These same people who are now supporting gender change and want to redefine things. You know, they're the same people who pushed for the Iraq War in what was known as Operation Mass Appeal by MI5 at the time. You know, the same people who launched, by the way, the most racist, overtly racist, might I add, campaign against Muslims and Islam on every network on TV, including Channel 4. I mean, there was one individual, I won't name him, hint, hint, on Channel 4 because things you've said, but there was one individual on Channel 4 who mocked Jacques Chirac. If you remember, Jacques Chirac was totally against the war, used common sense and said he's not going to let the French people go to a war which is not justified, you know. And this individual mocked Jacques Chirac, you know, in the most vilest possible way, called the French cowards and so on, you know. So my question to you was, doesn't it annoy you that these woke individuals seem to think that they're now anti-racist and they carry flags of Palestine around in their environmental marches? Doesn't that annoy you, George?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's a temptation in someone that's been around in politics as long as me to throw in the towel and say the world's gone mad. It's gone upside down. Right is left, left is right, upside down, inside out. Everything is in a complete mess because we have a rainbow coalition for war. We have a rainbow coalition for NATO, for more and more bombs. We have green parties in power demanding more and more war. We have green parties in power silent on the biggest act of ecological terrorism in the history of the planet at Nord Stream 2. Still, Google it, Greta Thunberg, Nord Stream 2. You will not find not a single reference from little Greta to the biggest eco-terrorist operation of all time. You will see the Green Party leaders in Australia, in Ireland, in Germany, of course, above all, where they seem to be running the government of little soldier Schultz. So when you've got Greens, I could mention about in Scotland where they care nothing about the environment and everything about identity politics, gender obsessions, transmania, and the whole show. I mean, I just saw that in the Netherlands, they picked Miss Netherlands is actually a Mr. Netherlands. Good luck to her, or him. She looked perfectly nice, but when I saw the girl that came as a runner-up of Miss Netherlands, a runner-up to a man, you've got to wonder at the sanity of these Western countries. And when I look at the Greens in Scotland, I should have thrown them in. They're obsessed with everything but greenery, everything but the environment. So, yeah, everything's upside down. Left and right are terms that are now rendered completely meaningless. So I've decided that my take is whether something is right or wrong. And I'm for right and against wrong. How about you? Thanks for that, Simon. Now, look, the Moats of Deutsch were dealing with these very subjects this afternoon. Some very, very telling contributions from women to cluster bombs, from what is a woman to cluster bombs, to the entire spectrum. I mean, if you think Britain's bad, Germany is much, much, much worse. And people like Dr. Dieter Dem, my counterpart on Moats of Deutsch, are emerging more and more clearly as standing sentinel for common sense politics, and people are becoming more and more interested in our German show. You can watch it back. It's on summer mode now because, unlike me, Dr. Dieter is on holiday. I don't actually get a holiday. I've got to work through my holidays. But Dr. Dieter was not able to do that. He'd already booked his 2 weeks in a caravan somewhere nice. So it's on summer mode. Don't ask me what that means, but it won't be the exact all singing, all dancing show. But the words and vision will be crystal clear, and you'll get the message, and you'll get it in subtitled English pretty shortly also. Moats of Deutsch. Do follow them, by the way, on Twitter and MySpace. Oh no, I meant Facebook. Now, YouTube comments. Roger Asai says, what does it show about NATO? That the addition of Japan, the entirety of the World War II Axis powers will be shoulder to shoulder under US leadership. Indeed so. And Frankie says, Threads jumped onto Instagram to get numbers, and now you can't delete it without deleting Instagram. What a con. Zuckerberg, a con? Really? On the line, Kevin in Suffolk, in England, on Ukraine. Go ahead, Kev.
Hello, mate. Okay, so
Hi.
Firstly, I just want to make a comment about these cluster munitions. I mean, they're going to be fired on territory that will be part of Russia. So in months and years to come, it's going to be Russian kids that find these things. I mean, I don't know if people have factored that in, but that's I think that's part of the calculation for providing this stuff. I mean, they're effectively like a terrorist weapon. They're terrible. Well,
it shows that they definitely have no confidence about retaking that territory, or they wouldn't be sowing it with tens, hundreds of thousands of landmines in front of them. They're obviously not intending to advance.
Yeah, very true. The other thing is, I mean, I think I was certainly hoping, and I think maybe you were, that there would be such a realignment if and when Russia achieves their aims in this war, that it would force some kind of realignment in the West. But I think what's going to happen, I mean, I'm a natural pessimist, but I think the West is going to basically sacrifice. I mean, they'll cut Ukraine off, and they will let Biden carry the can. I mean, whoever is really running things, Biden will be sacrificed. I mean, you can see that being lined up already. And they will also, and I think this is partly why Boris was sent last year, but he will be vilified. He will be vilified for, there will be a total change of the media coverage. Like, what on earth was Boris up to? Why did he scupper the peace plan? Blah, blah, blah. You know what's going to happen. They will just reorder what they've done. And the only thing, the thing I wanted to say as well is that Colonel McGregor was saying the other day that he holds no hope for the 2024 election. He thinks it's going to be, I mean, I don't know what you think, George, but I think it's patently obvious that, the fix was in last time. And it will happen again, especially if it's a three-way race between RFK, Trump, and whoever, the globalist candidate is. It will even be easier to actually to put the fix in, I think. Because it's exactly, if you think
Colonel McGregor's view, Kevin, I think Colonel McGregor's view is that we will not reach 2024 and the presidential election, that something will break before that. I never had the chance to find out from him what he means by that. He's probably not yet willing to say what he means by that, but he seemed to imply that the democratic system was broken beyond repair in the United States, and something other than a presidential election in 2024 will happen. Thanks, Kev. Coming up in the next hour, a real live Ukrainian, not just a Ukrainian, a former Ukrainian diplomat, Andrii Telizhenko, coming up after the break. Stay tuned. You don't want... We are led by a conspiracy of liars and killers who are ready to kill every last Ukrainian as long as they can keep the Russian war machine occupied and learn from it, sell weapons to their own side, and bring about the destruction of the European Union's own economy. This means we're led by criminals, not fools, but criminals who know the truth but tell the lies, who are ready to see significant numbers of people die for their lies. Now, this has been true before. It was obviously true in the Iraq War, but it has not been true on such a systematic, concerted basis as we are now experiencing. The man who said it best said it to the largest television audience ever known on Twitter. Tucker Carlson, which was the biggest audience on Fox News by a country mile, would have spoken it to 3.5 million people on an ordinary weekday. Instead, he spoke it on Elon Musk's Twitter, not sponsored by Pfizer or Big Pharma or the military-industrial complex, not sponsored by any commercial entity. Just Tucker Carlson speaking directly to camera. That's the future of television. Directly, online, like this, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Rumble, on Instagram. Everywhere you can get it is the future of television. Elon Musk paid a lot of money for Twitter, but he has repaid, at least in part, any debt that he had to the rest of us by putting Tucker Carlson in front of what will turn out to be, I hazard a guess, in excess of 100 million people. And he spoke some very important truths. So when you're finished watching the mother of all talk shows, if you have not yet done so, you have to watch Tucker Carlson on Twitter. But stay here meantime, because we've got some cracking guests and, of course, your phone calls.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, we don't often get to talk to a Ukrainian on the mother of all talk shows. We've tried many, many times, but most are afraid to do so because anyone with a different point of view inside Ukraine is in very real danger. Even two of his young opponents are set to be executed without trial, I read just yesterday. But others, members of parliament included, former ministers included, former diplomats, have been shanghaied, banged up, tortured, and disappeared. But one brave former Ukrainian diplomat and whistleblower has joined us this evening on the mother of all talk shows. His name is Andrii Telizhenko, and I'm particularly pleased to see him here. Andrii, thank you for joining us. There's so much that we could discuss. Can we start with the Biden crime family? Because I suspect, as someone was saying on the line just a minute ago, it's clear that they've decided that the Bidens have to be the scapegoats. And it seems to me obvious that the Hunter Biden business empire with Burisma and all the murky goings on that his father, when vice president of the United States, engaged in will be the proximate reason. So although Burisma is a forgotten name now, I suspect in the next few months the word Burisma will be on everyone's lips. Now, you played a role in attempting to blow the whistle on the Biden-Burisma lash-up. Tell us about it.
Hello, Mr. Galloway. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on. It's a great honor to be on your show. I can tell you, this situation where I got myself in when I came out with the truth on Burisma, on Hunter Biden, on Blue Star Strategies, and on the big guy, the vice president at the time of the United States, Joe Biden, I got politically destroyed. They tried to politically destroy me. Ukraine was investigating Burisma. Ukraine, the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine, had 6 criminal cases opened onto the Burisma gas company on itself. And it got closed down after the prosecutor, which Joe Biden wanted to get fired for the transaction of $1 billion of loan guarantees to Ukraine. They got a new prosecutor and they closed the whole case, all 6 cases, and Burisma just paid $200,000 of tax fees, and that's it. And today we see the result. It was all a corrupt scheme. Joe Biden knew what his son was going into. I know this because I was in the whole process of change starting from the working in the Ukraine government, where we're seeing the intelligence community ending with the prosecutor's office and working in Washington in the Ukraine embassy, and then working for the Democratic lobby firm Blue Star Strategies, which was the middleman between Joe Biden and Burisma. They were the ones who were overseeing Hunter Biden's work in Ukraine, with people like Amos Hochstein, who connected this whole story together. Joe Biden, when his son was getting hired into Burisma, exactly knew what the company was about, because Blue Star Strategies prepared a couple of documents for him, one legit, one not legit, like the mafia does. One would show that Burisma is a okay company, they have some problems, but they can be solved with PR. The other one they gave to Joe Biden directly, showing what Burisma was about, how corrupt it was, how to make money on it, on the side for Joe Biden's family. And that's what they were doing. They were making money out of this whole corrupt scheme in Ukraine. And the outcome we see today, how Ukraine was used by the corrupt deep state in Washington. The outcome is war and deaths in Ukraine, because Ukraine was used as it was used 10 years ago, and it is used today still by the deep state elites in Washington.
And not just the Bidens, of course. The sons of Pelosi, John Kerry, Mitt Romney, are all working in Ukraine. What first attracted all these Ukrainian companies to the sons of prominent American politicians? I mean, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out what's going on here, Andrii.
Of course. The problem is Ukrainians themselves, the Ukrainian government, the elites, led to buy into this so-called democracy. They bought Americans to cover up their stories. And the Americans, the Washington deep state elites, like Hillary Clinton, Blue Star Strategies, is a Hillary Clinton lobby firm. Sally Painter and Karen Tremontano, the CEOs of the company, used to be chief of staff to Bill Clinton and the advisor to Bill Clinton when he was the president of the United States in the 90s. So these guys, they're all interconnected with each other. Mitt Romney, for example, blocked my subpoena when Senator Johnson, when I came out and started to talk in truth and gave evidence to the U.S. Senate, they wanted to subpoena me so I could provide more documents which were under the Non-Disclosure Act in the agreement with Blue Star. But Mitt Romney blocked my subpoena in the Committee of Intelligence in the United States. His vote blocked my subpoena in March of 2020, and they only got a part of it. Today, I can speak the truth because I got falsely sanctioned by the U.S. government. I was sanctioned by the Ukrainian government illegally because they cannot sanction their own citizens just because coming out and telling the truth. I was part of their team for years. I thought it was democracy. I was young. I was part of the coup in Maidan coup. Senator McCain came. I was responsible for security. I was in the White House numerous times officially during official visits and meetings with the national security team of Joe Biden and Obama administration. And this is all on record in the Senate report, which Senator Johnson and Senator Grassley published in 2020 on Hunter Biden. But then they smeared me and they said, oh, because this guy told the truth and I saw it, I don't want this thing happening to my country. I want Ukraine to be used as a rag in this situation. And I came out and started telling the truth. I thought it would be investigated properly and this Ukraine would stop being used. No, they just went and destroyed me and labeled me as a pro-Russian, Russian spy, and then they just closed all the cases on Burisma, on the Ukraine interference in the elections, because I also testified to the Federal Election Commission, to the FBI, but it all got closed down after I got sanctioned. So this is the whole process. Ukrainians just let themselves be used. And this is what's happening today. The elites, not the citizens, but the elites of Ukraine, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was prestige to be part of the West, prestige to be part of the United States. If you have a connection with the U.S. ambassador, or you have a connection with the vice president, you're God in Ukraine. You could get any government position, any corrupt scheme, you'll be covered up, protected, and that's it. That's why it all led into this whole mess we see today. And it's still continuing, but with larger numbers. More than $200 billion were sent to Ukraine. We don't know where they are. People are still collecting money for the soldiers on the street because the soldiers don't have enough equipment. But this work is not going to be stopped just because if they would properly investigate the corruption, and Joe Biden would not be president because he was corrupt. He knew what his son was doing. He knew how he was making money, not only through his son, but how, because it was the money which was paid to his son was red flagged by the Latvian financial intelligence. The company where his son worked with illegally formed, the owner of the company, Burisma Zlochevsky, or when he was the Minister of Ecology, he signed certificates for his own company for gas development. So his company became a monopoly in the gas market in Ukraine in the 2000s. So the company itself was formed illegal. And that's why it was investigated. It had 6 criminal cases, and they were all closed down after Joe Biden pushed his own prosecutor general in Ukraine to close down those cases and fired the people they needed to fire. And as I said today, if this was properly investigated, we would not have a war today. And it can still be properly investigated and the war can be stopped because these people who are responsible for this, they have to go to prison or they have to stand in front of Congress or U.S. authorities and tell what happened for real. And because they threw whistleblowers like me under the bus, people are afraid to come up and tell the truth because they'll see, oh, Telizhenko got thrown under the bus. Why should we come up and tell the truth if we're going to be also destroyed? This is the question. The U.S. Congress, U.S. Republican Party today under Trump should come together and help people like me to come up to tell the truth and go in front of Congress and stand in front of the Department of Justice, any court. I can stand in front of any court and testify under oath with evidence and documents what really happened in Ukraine. But the problem is they don't have the guts to do this right now. And I hope they will get the guts to come up and start doing what they have to do.
Well, look, it's not a great line, Andrii, but it was great testimony, and I'm sure everyone will be looking you up now to get more deeply into your role as a whistleblower. I wish you safety, first of all, and clarity, and a better line next time we talk. Thanks for joining us, Andrii Telizhenko. Who's going to win, Musk's Twitter or Zuckerberg's Threads? Looks like Zuck is unraveling in the poll here. At least get your vote in before the end of the show. Monkey Boy says landlords are raising rents in Britain by £100 and more. Prices in food supermarkets increase daily. People can't afford to heat their homes. Glad the sanctions against Russia are working. Well, it's only about 15 weeks to the winter time. Email into the show tonight from Tony. Remember our email address, onair@moats.tv. Hi, George. Sir Graham Brady is believed to have 44 letters of no confidence in Rishi Sunak. How many European governments will be left standing? So many are in big political trouble. Thanks, Tony. Blimey, is it that season again? Letters. Sir Graham Brady. No confidence. I've been here before. Deja vu. I'll be right back after a quick break. On the line is a Rose in Texas. Sounds like the beginning of a song. On Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
fan of the show, transgender fan of the show, and I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children at nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, I talked about Cambodia earlier, but I did mention that Laos was even worse hit by cluster bombs and by literally unimaginable levels of bombing. Laos, anyone know where it is? Tiny place. Certainly very few Americans knew where it was, least of all the Congress, because Richard Nixon was literally making war on Laos when nobody in the United States government even knew about it. But one of my favorite Twitter accounts, Sarah Sahurakso, posted this. The US dropped 270 million cluster bombs on Laos. Every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 9 years, from 1964 until 1973, a plane load of cluster bombs was dropped on Laos by American B-52s. 50 years later, civilians, including children, are still being blown up by the bombs. Just think about that. Here's the numbers in the UK and Ireland, 08081 965522. It's entirely free. You call us now, we'll call you back. In the US and Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344. And in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Of course, the situation in Ukraine is very serious. Gonzalo Lira is still missing. Andrii, I don't know his location, but I'd be very surprised if he is currently in Ukraine. Because anyone with a different point of view in Ukraine, their life is at risk. The life of their family is at risk. At the very least, you'll be shanghaied unless you're over 66 and be sent to the front line as a mine clearer. Or you'll be thrown into a dungeon, or you'll be disappeared, or you'll be murdered. The opposition political parties have all been banned. Elections have been cancelled. All opposition media has been closed. The Kiev gang is in power in perpetuity. At least that's what they think. Ian is in Loch Lomond. Well, how could I resist a call from Loch Lomond, even if he wants to talk about Turkey? Ian, welcome.
Hi, George. Nice to talk to you.
And you, what a lovely location. Good to see it on the screen. What would you like to say, Ian?
Well, I'm a Black Islander originally. I just find myself washed up by Loch Lomond. George, I was wondering what you make of what Erdogan and Turkey is doing. We had President Zelensky do his little tour of NATO countries prior to the Vilnius summit coming up next week, Monday, Tuesday. And he insulted the Bulgarian president, but managed to get a power deal out of that. He then went to Turkey. And we know how close Turkey has been to Russia recently. Talk of a new Turk Stream hub and energy hub. And he comes away, it seems like nothing's going to happen. Suddenly he comes away with the 5 Azov commanders that Turkey had brokered last year after Mariupol to keep under house arrest, who'd promised on their parole not to take part in the conflict. But Erdogan lets them go. They fly back with Zelensky. They have this ceremony in Lviv, and they say, well, we're going back to the conflict. And then we know that they announced that they're having a deal that Ukraine and Turkey will make drone weapons. Has Turkey... Erdogan, we know, he likes to play both sides of the wing at once. But has he stabbed Russia and Putin in the back? Because Putin got a lot of flack when he allowed those Azov battalion commanders to go to Turkey. I was wondering what you thought.
Well, a brilliant and erudite call from Loch Lomond, from a Black Isle man. It's a credit to our country. Ian, that level of question. My answer in short is no. I don't believe that Turkey has stabbed Russia in the back. I think there are things we don't know yet about what's going on. President Putin wrote, or published rather, today, a very long treatise, which I read word by word, even though a lot of the words are quite difficult to read. And the history was long and complex. But his thesis that he published today was that the Russians and the Ukrainians are one people, or at least half of the Ukrainians and the Russians are one people. Make of that what you will. He also appeared to be ready to agree to a properly applied Minsk II agreement as a solution to the crisis, which I was surprised to read. Now, in the end, I want the war to end. I think the Russian leadership knows far more than I possibly can about the political and military situation on the ground, in the air, and in the international corridors. And so I suspect there's something going on, some kind of basis being discussed for some kind of agreement, basically to halve the Ukraine into what you might call the Korean frozen conflict situation. North Korea, South Korea, East Ukraine, West Ukraine. I don't believe that that will resolve the fundamental reasons for the war in every regard, because the Western Ukraine would then become even more of a satrapy of NATO. And so I hope that that's not how it ends. It seems to me that a division of the country and a regime change in Kiev, which will lock NATO out of Western Ukraine, is a fundamental and inescapable condition for an end to the war. That and the liberation of Odessa a Russian city, if ever there was one, an historic Russian city, if ever there was one, and a link up with Transnistria, and therefore the landlocking of the Western Ukrainian state. So we'll see. But anyway, the point I'm making is you would have thought that Putin was pretty busy to be writing a long, historical, erudite, intellectual, academic piece on how we got here. But he did, and it bears his fingerprints all over it. I have no doubt that he did not delegate to any AI or any factotum to write it for him. It's worth reading if you're interested in this subject in detail. But back to Turkey. Russia should never have agreed to send these Nazi leaders to Turkey. It cannot have expected that Erdogan would send them back quite so quickly, where they were living safely. Some of them have gotten fat. They have been living well in Turkey. The food's lovely there. Now they're back in Ukraine and forced to say they're headed back to the front. Well, I suspect they will not last long at the front, and I suspect that little Zelensky hopes that they will not last long at the front. Because think of this, Ian. How will Zelensky's end come? Almost certainly not on the end of a Russian missile, still less on the end of a Russian bayonet. Zelensky's end will come from the bayonets, the daggers of all those people around him, particularly the right sector, the Azov battalion, now regiment, the Banderites, the supporters of the Hitler, Nazi collaborating operator of the mass murder machine of the Holocaust in the East. These are the people that will make short work of Mr. Zelensky. And who knows when they'll come bursting through his door. So there's wheels with us, is what I'm saying here. Putin will be going to Turkey very soon, which is in itself interesting, that he goes there after Zelensky's been there, and so on. We'll have to wait and see. Meanwhile, the war drags on, and it's going very badly for the Ukrainian side. So any negotiation will, of course, begin from the point at which the fighting stops. And that's where time is against Zelensky. Daniel is in Florida on the US and China. Daniel, I saw Janet Yellen kowtowing excessively to a Chinese minister who was bamboozled because kowtowing in China is actually not allowed, least of all from a visiting US Treasury minister. Is that what you want to talk about?
No, sir, Mr. George. How are we doing today?
All good, brother. Go ahead.
Mine was just more of an observation about kind of on a global what's going on. I believe this. I don't think NATO will ever get involved in this war. I think they are using Ukraine to not only diminish Russia's capacity economically, but also militarily, because I think the United States is solely focused on its war with China. And throughout United States wars like Vietnam, Russia was always there supplying the opposing country militarily. I think this war has diminished their capacity to be able to help China when it comes to that. And at the same time, it's destroyed the European economy. So they're going to be forced to buy our gas from us, which will be our war chest in itself. I'm saying I've got firsthand information as far as the early warning satellites being put on every atoll, every island in the Pacific. Like they're putting radar stations like crazy. Like they are full-fledged gearing for the war with China. And I think this was just like a second-hand thought just to kind of weaken Russia, so they limit their ability in that conflict.
Well, I think the opposite has happened if that was their intention. Russia is now with an army 3 times the size it was before this began, with the battle-hardened hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They've shown their military-industrial complex is far more effective than Western ones. They are not running out of ammunition. It's you that's running out of ammunition. So I don't know how you're going to fight China without ammunition. I agree with you that China is, if I can mix the metaphor, a bit of cultural appropriation, China is the big enchilada. That's obvious. Russia, there's no need actually at all for America to be hostile to Russia. They are fishing in different parts of the river. But the fools that run the USA have gotten you into this fine mess. And the Russian economy is doing very well, thank you very much. Their military is doing very well. Their military-industrial complex is doing very well. Their alliance with China has never been stronger or closer. And Chinese are well aware of all these activities going on. The Chinese are well aware of America's power. But China is powerful too. As one of the best of the Chinese leaders put it best, we know that the United States can destroy China many times over. We are content that we can destroy the United States of America only once. Thanks, Daniel. Email from Anne. Hello, George and team. I'm wondering at the permission given by Grossi to Japan to dump its toxic waters into the sea. Do you have an opinion as to why this permission was given, Annie, in the USA? It's an absolute scandal. That's for sure. The Fukushima water will never be normal water. It will always be irradiated water. It will always be nuclear contaminated water. And yet they are being given permission to dump it into the ocean. And China, and I think South Korea, have taken the only sensible option of banning all seafood imports from Japan. Let's make the Japanese pay for their reckless eco-terrorism. Thanks, Annie. A quick break, and then it's your calls all the way to the end of the show. Stay tuned. Donald is in Inverness on Assange. Go ahead, Donald.
Hi, George. Good to hear from you again. I'm phoning about Assange, but really your audience is highly privileged to benefit from your international research. I mean, I've learned, tonight you told us about the misfired missile and the helicopter crash. We'll never hear that on mainstream news. Last time, Gonzalo Lira told us about Poland doubling its armed forces. These are very important pieces of information. Now, information is one thing, but what I want to do, George, is I want to raise the topic of conscience. But I want to illustrate it with an incident that I saw in a documentary in World War II. A U.S. soldier called Glenn Fraser had a Japanese officer's sword at his head, ready to chop it off to make him an example to others. And he was told that he would die for having his hands in his pockets in the cold weather. And did he have any last words to say? So this Fraser looked the fellow, this is the Japanese officer, looked him in the eye, and he told the Japanese officer that he could kill him. But he says, you cannot kill my spirit. He says, and my spirit will lodge in your body and haunt you until the day you die.
Very powerful, Donald. I too, like you, believe in the judgment day. I believe in the afterlife. I believe that we will reap what we sow. And I agree entirely with the point you make about conscience. I put it this way, that my conscience is my daily communion with God. And if I follow my conscience, I won't do wrong. And if we all reawaken our conscience, as you beautifully put it, then we will have no need for policing. We'll certainly have less need for policing. and heaven knows we could do with that. You know that they speak the best English in the world, in Inverness, and Donald is a good example of it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
A big response to the poll from my highly valued patrons on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. I really need your help on that, and it will cost you less than a cup of tea in an insalubrious cafe. Fra Hughes, a long-time patron and friend of mine, he says Instagram already has millions of subscribers, so it's an easy option for many. It may finish Twitter for the younger generation. And Paul Cormacan says, I don't use either of them. No intention of starting. Social media can often turn into anti-social media. A Moats legend, Graham Briggs-White. Thanks, Graham. I do not trust any of them as they're attached to the military-industrial complex, but Elon has the better track record. And how? I mean, I've got about 500,000 followers on Twitter and about 1 million followers on Facebook. But take a look at the view count on my work on Twitter compared to the view count on Facebook, where I'm being not so much suppressed but strangled almost to death by my former parliamentary colleague, the splendid, liberal and democratic Lord, whatever his name is. James Butler on Ukraine says, hopefully the EU and NATO will soon break up due to the Ukraine catastrophe and the EU open-door migration policy that is leading to unrest in many places in the so-called Garden. Talk of more countries holding membership referendums is great news. Tudor says you can now leave reviews on Spotify of the audio-only version of this show, and some of you have. Thank you very much for that. Tudor says the best political podcast there is. Number one for hard facts. And Rafael in Costa Rica says Moats delivers a top-notch lesson on world events. Even better when that's done defending the people of Palestine. And AD says, well, George, I'm loving your podcast show where you go places other so-called journalists can only dream of. MSM is dead. Curious people like myself find men and women like you. Keep fighting, sir. Thank you, AD. So I think we'll go back to the lines. Saad is in Virginia, USA, on a different subject. Go ahead, Saad.
Hi there. Good evening, Mr. Galloway. I'm actually just briefly touching on the subject of fentanyl pandemic and the COVID pandemic that are both blamed on China. About last year, I think a little bit before Christmas, the local news over here was trying to indoctrinate us by telling us that the opioid pandemic related to fentanyl is being brought by the Mexican cartel that are receiving shipments and supplies from China. And keeping in mind, this is a drug that is 50 times more stronger than opium or opioids and also deadlier. But what they're telling us is a very, very contradictory thing, because fentanyl can be made in any pharmacy of the world. And in Mexico, it would be very dirt cheap to even produce it in the pharmacy rather than even receiving any sort of shipments from China.
A lot cheaper than shipping it from China. Breaking Bad, anyone? Anyone seen Breaking Bad? The idea that the fentanyl opioid epidemic in North America, Canada's just as bad, proportionately, by the way, is the result of some fiendish CPC plot, has got their head up their fundament. First of all, it's the countries involved that are demanding this product that have the primary responsibility to stop it. And secondly, what kind of a border does the US have with Mexico that you can get truckloads, shiploads, shed loads of fentanyl across the border from Mexico? I mean, Trump said build the wall. Maybe you should have built it, and built it so that fentanyl can't get across it. What do you say?
Well, Mr. Galloway, that's what I was saying. Since about roughly 7-8 some years ago, roundabout, we have had the opioid epidemic declared officially. We had 115 some or 120,000 some per year dying just from the opioid epidemic. But again, this is the mind-baffling thing that an opium, which is a Schedule II drug, recognized for medical purposes. Why would we have a synthetic opioid, fentanyl, which is 50 times more strong and deadlier? But even aside from that,
I think it's 100 times. I don't want to contradict you because I'm not a scientist, but my understanding is that fentanyl is 100 times stronger than opium, heroin. And of course, there is nobody taking fentanyl in China. There are no drug addicts in China. They tried that once before, leading to the Opium Wars and the loss, amongst other places, of Hong Kong. China will never, you talk about a war on drugs, there's a war on drugs, all right, but only in China. There's no war on drugs in America or Canada or in Britain, for that matter. There's wholesale surrender to drugs in those countries. But there ain't no fentanyl being taken in Tiananmen Square. Not like Piccadilly in Manchester, where I toured with the police a few years ago, 4 years ago now, where people were literally falling down in front of our eyes, hooked on opioids, on fentanyl. One of the most horrific experiences of my life was in otherwise pristine and beautiful Vancouver. If you go behind the railway station in Vancouver, you've walked onto the set of a zombie movie. An entire street, black with, literally crawling, staggering, semi-comatose men and women, all hooked on fentanyl. And you want to blame that on China? Sad, last word to you.
Sorry, just one last thing I want to say. I just came from overseas the last 2-3 months. I had found out that the strains of the COVID are mutating based on an individual's immune system, meaning that if somebody has a very strong immune system, the COVID strain would mutate and jump to another person. 30% of Karachi, roughly, were positive for the COVID. So just wanted to mention about these mutating strains that are getting stronger and stronger from individual to individual. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Mr. Galloway.
Thank you, Asad. Another subject, of course, and now on the 13th. When is that? This Thursday? Yeah, this Thursday, I have got another No to NATO, No to War meeting to chair. There's the speakers. How about that for a lineup? His Excellency Peter Ford, former British ambassador, the one and only George Samueli, a regular guest here on the Mother of All Talk Shows, libertarian, right-wing politician David Clues, and yours truly. If I tell you that 500,000 people have watched the last No to NATO meeting, 500,000, making it the biggest anti-war meeting since 2003, since February 15th, 2003, 500,000 people watched the last one. I expect this one will be even bigger. So look out for it on all my platforms. No to NATO, No to War, on the 13th of July. Some cracking speakers. I'm looking forward to introducing them. Another email, Sant says, good evening, George. I hope you're well during these nervy times. Nervy, moi. Musk won yesterday when he limited views to 600. What are people going to do? They're going to open a second account, thus increasing user numbers on Twitter. Thank you for your time. Kind regards. Sant. I don't know about that. Can't comment on it. But online too, Cornelius. Cornelius, welcome back.
Evening, George. How are you?
All good, sir. Better to hear from you. Go ahead.
I was obviously listening to the show, and a gentleman phoned up earlier on regarding he thought that United States would try and pull out of Ukraine quicker than what I believe. I believe that Jake Sullivan, who's like an election strategist, as part of his team with Victoria Nuland and Antony Blinken, I think the last thing that Joe Biden would want to see is Ukraine totally collapse just before the 24 election, which is only like 18 months away. And I think the situation with the United States is that they would want to drag this out as long as possible in order for Joe Biden not to be looked upon like what happened in Afghanistan. So for me, that's it. Of course, if Russia
there's only one. I'll let you back in. There's only one thing less that he would like, and that is to actually have to go to war in Ukraine, because running for an election based on having gone to war with a nuclear-armed superpower over the issue of where, on which side of a line Kupiansk should lie, when it's been in 4 countries in the last 100 years, it would be a very hard sell. So I take your point, Cornelius. I don't think they'll want to precipitately pull out. They certainly won't want to end his presidency the way it began, with a total collapse, stealing like thieves in the night out of Afghanistan. They won't want that to be the optic of the end of the affair. But neither does the United States intend to get involved in the war in Ukraine. Of that, I am perfectly certain. I'm not so sure about some of the lesser mortals inside NATO. There are people who might fancy a non-NATO coalition. Poland and the Baltic republics, for example. Maybe they'll send soldiers. Maybe even the British will. My good friend Ian Puddick, who has his ear to the ground on these things, tells me that the British Ministry of Defence is asking around about volunteers. Not sure how many of those they'll get, right enough. Certainly not at military rates of pay, maybe mercenary rates of pay, but some of the lesser powers in NATO, perhaps. But the United States will not send its children to die for Kupiansk. Got bad news for them. Cornelius, last word to you.
It is obviously controversial, and as for what's been going on, and it's absolutely a disgrace as for what's been going on over the last 18 months or more. A lot of it could have been avoided, obviously, with the Minsk
500
agreement.
days it is now.
I remember the British Parliament all standing up against China because they didn't abide by the agreement signed by, I think, Chris Patton in relation to neutrality in Hong Kong. And yet the same people don't call out Ukraine for not abiding by the Minsk agreements. So it's a disgrace, personally, and I hope it comes to an end a lot sooner than a lot sooner.
I thought these Minsk agreements were dead, an ex-agreement, a dead parrot. I was surprised to see President Putin, in a way, resurrecting Minsk in the piece that I referred to today. Do you think returning to Minsk is any kind of solution now after all this blood?
It's difficult to say. I don't think the same sort of terms as what was written or supposedly not signed with the Minsk agreements will stand up in relation to what's going on right now. But at some stage, this conflict will come to an end, and it will come to an end through negotiation. And as I say, I just hope it comes a lot sooner than what's going on at the moment. The amount of people that have lost their lives in relation to this conflict, and the way Europe has gone in just to appease the United States as usual, I think it's an absolute disgrace. And I just hope that people have the common sense to get on the table a lot sooner.
Beautiful call. Thanks, Cornelius in Swansea in Wales. YouTube comments. GDNPB says depleted uranium is just as bad or worse than cluster bombs. Of course. At least you can see the danger with cluster bombs, not so much the radiation deforming the children, as I saw many a time in melancholy walks through the children's wards in the hospitals in Iraq. Porch View Farm says, thank you, George, for having Andrii Telizhenko. It's about time he is known. I've been listening to him since 2017. Definitely. We'll have him back on, just get a better line. Back to the lines. Ardavan is in Switzerland to talk about Iran. How's that for a global university of the airwaves? Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. I just called you to ask you a question, and that is, if I am not mistaken, Iran just became the 9th fully fledged member of the SCO. So I was wondering, what is your take on this whole situation? In particular, with regards, if I understand correctly, it's going to have a major effect in terms of the dealing with Afghanistan. Most of the countries around Afghanistan are now part of the SCO. So is this going to change anything in terms of Afghanistan, apart from the fact that it's going to be
well,
a
I
very
think
big
Afghanistan
deal?
will, yeah. I think Afghanistan itself is interested in joining the SCO. And on the face of it, that sounds to me like a good idea. The more Afghanistan can be brought in from the cold, the better life will be for the poor Afghans who have suffered from now more than 40 years of war, including civil war, but foreign invasion and occupation. That's too much for anybody to bear. The SCO contains more than half of the world's population. It now contains well over half of the world's sovereign wealth. And I think it's on course to merge with the BRICS, which will have to have a new acronym, of course, from A to Z. There's 41 countries trying to join the BRICS. I think the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the BRICS will merge, and they will have a single currency. They will have their own gold-backed currency. Just think about that. Who's going to keep their money in reserve in dollars, pieces of worthless paper, when they could hold the BRICS currency backed by the gold standard? Ardavan, thanks for the call. Michael is in Washington State. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you for your courage and leading by example, George. Thank you for accepting this call.
Thank you, sir.
The deal with the 5 Azovs going to Zelensky is apparently, according to the Military Summary channel, YouTube channel, he has a speculation on that, and that is, you know, Turkey and Russia communicate. They don't have any allegiance to Ukraine, certainly. And there was a grain deal that allowed Ukraine to ship grains in and out, going in and out of Odessa. And apparently there was enough under the cover shenanigans that Putin was tired of putting up with, that now Putin is allowed to break that deal and save face and take over and stop the grain shipments coming out of Odessa. And in addition to that, then Russia will be able to more patrol the Black Sea area around there and keep the American drones out, the detection drones. How's that?
Well, I agree with you, Michael. I said earlier, and I say it again, although, of course, President Erdogan is famously opportunistic, I think that the course for Turkey is set. It is an Eastern course. It is a Eurasian course. The West has been spurned by Turkey because the West spurned Turkey. Erdogan has spurned the West because the West tried to destroy Erdogan. So the die is cast, and the future for Turkey is headed east as a major, powerful force within the new Eurasian future. I don't believe, as I said earlier, that Erdogan stabbed Russia in the back. And I do think there are many things that we don't yet know about all of this. These Azov people will now have to go back to the front, Mike. I'm not sure quite how much they really will relish it. But now that I've got you on, tell me this. You're in a progressive part of the country. I think we can agree on that. What's the current feeling amongst the citizens around you about the war in Ukraine?
I actually don't know. I don't ask about it very much because I'm not crazy about the way Biden is doing things, and I test this out once in a while, mentioning things about the economy here. I get funny looks, so it's hard to tell.
And is Biden popular there in Washington State?
I can't tell. I don't know. I think a lot of people have misgivings underneath that they don't talk about because with all the media, going south on the cocaine thing, it's I think people are unwilling to say, oh yeah, I was for Joe, and I don't think they're so willing to say that. It's just kind of muffled.
No.
Very muffled.
Muffled, indeed. Muffled by the snow job that's being done on the cocaine scandal in the area of the White House. The only friends and family can be allowed in, with cameras bristling from every eave, from every wall, in every room and corridor, but they might not be able to find out who the culprit was that was sniffing the coke inches away from the nuclear football operated by an octogenarian, senile old fool. It's kind of a morality tale of the West. I made the point earlier. I make it again now in different words. It's one thing to be enthralled to American leadership when American leadership looks like something. Jack Kennedy, Bill Clinton even, Barack Obama even. But when you're taking orders from a man so physically and mentally infirm as Joe Biden, and when you're being asked to commit harikiri in your own national interest, to destroy your own economy, to make your own people cold, to make your own people poorer than they were before, to risk your own political future and your chances of re-election, when you're being asked to do all of that by Joe Biden, what kind of man or woman are you if you agree to do that? So I don't really blame the Americans. They've actually done all right economically out of all this. You heard an earlier caller saying we're going to have to buy their gas at whatever the price. Well, good for them. I don't blame the Americans. I blame us. And I know that people like to say, well, you say us, it's our leaders, but the leaders were elected by us. The leaders are not being removed by us. Or they blame the media, but the media is paid for by us. If nobody watched Sky News, if nobody paid the BBC license fee, if nobody paid for the gutter newspapers in Britain, if nobody consumed the fake news industry, they'd all collapse. If nobody voted for these politicians who've committed suicide on your behalf, they'd be out of office. So who do I blame ultimately? At the end, I guess I have to confess, I blame us. Because we failed. Those of us involved in politics, we failed to change enough people's minds. And the rest of you who are not involved in politics have to live with the consequences of our failure. I pray to God nightly, as always, but I pray to God that it will not be fatal, this failure, and that will not bring about the destruction, the end of all this wonderful world. Thanks very much for watching what has been the mother of all talk shows. God willing, I'll be back on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK time. Please bring another viewer with you. I don't know the numbers over the last 7 days. It's 1 million plus, that's all they tell me now. But I want to be 2 million. I want to be 2 million. I want to be able to tell you that. All the best. Have a good night.